Hey guys, tonight we're stepping behind convent walls, not for prayer, but for secrets. Because these nuns, they're not what you learned about in school. Forget the soft halos and harp music. You're about to step into a world where desire claws under woolen habits, where silence is full of whispered names, and where not everyone makes it out with their faith or reputation intact. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Dropped into a 13th century convent, you'd last maybe a week before accusations of heresy or worse. So, before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, what city are you in and what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive. The heavy wooden gates shut behind you. Stone walls like a fortress. No going back. Handed a rough wool robe, you're barefoot, skin prickling against cold flagstones. A grim-faced sister leads you down a silent corridor. This is where you'll be reborn, they say. You belong to God now, but the air is heavy with unspoken secrets. You meet the abbess, her face lined, eyes sharp. She mutters a Latin word to an older sister. Novice. That's you. A year of limbo awaits, learning rules, praying more than sleeping before they decide if you're fit for vows. Your first task, scrub the cloister walk. Next to you, Sister Magdala mutters about useless piety, rolling her eyes. Sent here because her brother got the inheritance, she's quick to tell you. You're not here because you're holy. You're here because you're disposable. By Compline, you're on your knees, smelling of vinegar and sweat. In the chapel, your stomach growls. Food won't be offered again until tomorrow. Hunger purifies. You sleep on a straw mattress. In the next bed, a nun whispers someone's name, not Christ's. Medieval convents weren't just places of peace. Many housed women who had no other choice, too rebellious, too poor for a dowry, or simply inconvenient. They brought their pain and ambitions with them, and the silence was often full of words. You notice the abbess's favourites, like Sister Joan, whose hands are never dirty. Rumour says Joan's noble family bribed the abbess for her comfort. As you try to sleep, Sister Rebecca, the convent enforcer patrols. With contraband, you'd be sent to the reflection cell, a cold stone box. She especially hates laughter, having caught 2 nuns holding hands after Compline years ago. Were convents havens or prisons? It depends on who you ask. Morning bells rip you from a half-dream of home. In the cold dormitory, bodies stir, some praying, others cursing silently. In the fog-wrapped cloister, frost crunches underfoot as you head to Lord's. Your voice blends into the Latin chorus. Silence is safe, questions dangerous, obedience everything. Your assignment, the scriptorium binding room. It smells of parchment and boiled leather. Sister Catalin, sharp-eyed, oversees you slicing vellum pages. Your trembling fingers are irrelevant. As you work, you hear other stories. Sister Isabel, voice dry as old paper, explains, "Many of us were given to God before we could walk. Economics, not piety." That's the truth of this place. It settles on you. This is a storage facility for inconvenient women. You start to see how sisters carry their family histories like wounds. Some are resigned, others burn with quiet anger. But a few, like Sister Avis, still fight. She catches your eye at midday meal, chewing slower, looking around. Later, she whispers, "Don't let your thoughts get lazy. That's when they win." A strange fact. Medieval nuns had fashion codes. Different veils, robe colours and belt length signalled status. Some even hid small tokens from their pre-convent lives. Holiness had its loopholes. Sister Hiltrude collapses during Nun. Bruises on her arms don't look self-inflicted. Weakness, they whisper. This place eats you slowly. Less sleep than a soldier, more work than a farmer. No say in your fate. It's the subtle power dynamics. Who gets warm water? Who eats first? Everything is watched, not just by God. That night, Avis watches the hallway, a knowing smile on her face. The fog lifts, but the truth remains. You're starting to look like them. Hollow-eyed, quiet, pressed down by God and rules. You learn about the dowry game. Rich girls get privileges, no dowry girls become burdens. Your mother's averted eyes on the day you left take on new meaning. The convent is a chessboard, and God is wallpaper. Historians confirm convents were often parking lots for inconvenient daughters. Marriage was expensive. A convent with a respectable dowry was neat, clean. Most didn't choose this life, and if they fought, imprisonment, starvation, even death. You meet Prioress Adele, who sets you copying registers of purity. A chaste woman is the church's finest treasure, she states. Your hymen is worth more than your voice. Virginity tests were real, invasive, and based on flawed biology. The church's obsession with a woman's body and its purity is absurd and disturbing, but there are small rebellions. Avis slips you a page of poetry, not scripture, written by a nun years ago. It's about touch, longing, hunger for something more than righteousness. We preserve what we can, Avis shrugs. You realize not all attachments here are sisterly. Some relationships are deeper, physical, hidden, but alive. You find a love letter tucked in the cloister wall, water-stained, written by my beloved sister. No name, but the words speak of shared nights, fear and longing. The rumours aren't just rumours. You could turn it in, but you return it. That night, you dream of secret flames. Sister Magdala during laundry mutters about being brides of Christ, but he never shows up on wedding night. The church's obsession with Virgo Intacta is bizarre. You hear nuns telling dry jokes about bishops asking if they've felt temptation in dreams. Yet, young girls face purity inspections to gain entrance. One day, Avis shows you a hidden writing room. My soul is mine, even if my body is not, is carved into the wall. You ask her if she's loved someone here. Yes, she replies, her memory touching the wall. You look at the sisters differently. Many are defeated, but some found connection. You notice Sister Joan passing a folded scrap to Sister Clarice. Secrets hum in the air. The convent is a theatre of roles. Your role, the quiet one who listens, watches. But inside, you're building a map of names, looks, silences. What happens when a woman stops pretending? The sounds of the convent shift. You're hearing not just bells, but soft sighs, floorboard creaks, rustling parchment, the rhythm of secrets. Winter deepens. You spend more time with Avis, exploring forgotten alcoves. She tells you about night whispers, sisters talking in code, sharing truths. You listen, piecing together rumours. Sister Agnella, young, confused, missing, officially nerves. Whispers say, tried to run, locked in the cellar. Sister Mirabelle warns you, they're watching how close we get. Inspectors fear too much fondness. You've seen it too. Lingering hands, comforting touches. Brief, stolen, dangerous. You see Joan and Clarice together in the garden, a heavy stillness around them. The 14th century bishop who investigated improper attachments confirms it. Shared beds. Passionate letters. His solution, more isolation. But for some, the convent was also a refuge, a place to learn, to read, to find someone who listened, risking everything. You begin keeping your own notes, not scripture, but sacred truths. The first love letter you found wasn't yours, but then you find another in your own hands. You figure out it's from Clarice. You slide a blank page back. I remember you too. It begins. Not romance, not yet. An understanding. A thread. You watch each other across the chapel, across workstations. Here, in a place built to erase your selfhood, someone reminds you that you still are someone. Father Henry preaches about Christ's desire, but it's the only kind allowed. Anything else is sin. But Clarice drops lavender at your knee. It smells like defiance. Priests had private entrances into convents. They didn't just bring prayers, they brought letters, gossip, and sometimes children. You find such a door. Unlocked, and hear movement. Sister Agnes disappears the next morning. You and Clarice share secrets, pass notes. The church calls tenderness treason. But you feel closer to God when you think of Clarice. You exchange a lavender-stitched fabric. She kisses you. I see you, she says. You finally breathe your own air. The scream rips through the convent. Raw, primal. Sister Magdala reveals the truth. A novice gave birth last night. She smothered it, tried to hide it in the bread oven. Sister Adelina, the quiet girl. The abbess calls it abomination. Avis reveals the priest's involvement will be buried. The church blames the woman, transfers the man. This wasn't rare. Infants hidden, women punished, executed. You don't eat. The convent fasts. Adelina and her close friend Heloise are gone. The convent absorbs scandal with silence. Winter thickens. You're reassigned to the infirmary where you meet Sister Wulfhilda. Older, presence like ancient stone, she wears a fox pendant. She's a healer, grinding yarrow, muttering chants not entirely Latin. I was trained by a wise woman, she smirks. The church prefers to call them witches. Many convents had such unofficial herbalists, knowledge passed down, tolerated until it wasn't. Wulfhilda teaches you. Mugwort, skullcap, lady's mantle. Not all gods demand silence. You witness Wulfhilda's quiet healings. Sister Margreta recovers. Healing here happens beneath rituals, in rooms the abbess rarely enters. This knowledge is dangerous. If discovered, Wulfhilda would be accused of sorcery. Clarice finds you in the herb garden. She begins pulling weeds beside you. I thought I'd lost you. You work in silence. She picks rue for you. Protection. These secrets are for survival, for rebellion, for a power the church would rather stay buried. During Vespers, Avis slips out of the chapel. You follow her through the wind-sliced garden to a loose panel in the stone. Behind it, a tunnel. Inside, a man, Brother Aldrich. Once a monk, now neither here nor there. He left because he couldn't live where questioning was sin. Avis too. This is the other way, a network finding cracks in the wall, sharing forbidden ideas. They tell the story of Idgith, a nun who escaped, dressed as a monk, thriving near the coast. Nunners weren't rare. Some ran taverns, even joined pirate crews. The line between heresy and sainthood was paper thin. You return to the convent, seeing everything differently. Clarice nods when you tell her there's more outside the wall. She already knows. Father Henry's confessions feel like surveillance. He listens like a collector, probing for inappropriate affection. You learn to craft safe sins to satisfy him. Sister Iada is reassigned after Father Henry speaks to the abbess about inappropriate behaviour. Piety is performative, confession is currency, virtue, a disguise for control. Medieval confessors used manuals to extract sin. Their booths were psychological surveillance chambers. You keep your true thoughts buried. You lie in confession. Beatrix begins having visions. The convent has two choices for such women, mystic or mad. Beatrix speaks of flames on the altar, the Virgin with blood on her palms. Clarice tells you Beatrix laughed during Compline. Joy from terror. You visit her in secret. She's humming, starving herself, claiming to be near angels. Wulfhilda says it's starvation and sleep deprivation. But when Beatrix screams during matins, accusing the priest, she's dragged away, sent for treatment, meaning bleeding. Truth here isn't clarity, it's silence. Sister Agnes collapses during matins, then sings an eerie, non-human song. The abbess declares it divine ecstasy, a spectacle to parade. Clarice whispers she bled from her side. They said it was the stigmata. Medieval convents loved a bleeding saint. It drew pilgrims, money. Agnes becomes a living relic. Wulfhilda, pragmatic, says Agnes is sick, hallucinating. But the abbess cashes in. When Agnes becomes a threat due to her power, she's sedated, moved to the cellar. Saints are only saints as long as they're useful. The bishop arrives unannounced with two inquisitors. An inspection. He interrogates you. Dreams, visions, temptations. You give compliant answers. He looks like a merchant inspecting fish for rot. Later, you see him with Sister Joan, too close. Joan is promoted. Hush money, Avis says. Power wins. They say Sister Agnes is possessed. The whispers start. Rebecca says the word aloud. Agnes is moved to the bell tower, a dusty, cold space. You visit her in secret. They want to burn it out of me, she whispers. It's not a demon. It's just noise. Loud. An exorcist arrives. During the ritual, Agnes declares, "There is no demon. Only pain. Only loneliness. Only silence." "I only screamed because no one would listen," she laughs. "The devil doesn't live in her body. He lives in their fear." She's sedated, moved to the deepest cellar. Avis is grim. She's not possessed. She's broken. You witness a miracle, a forbidden manuscript hidden behind other books, erotic religious poetry, illuminations of women embracing, written by Sister Tlesia, a nun who lived here generations ago, in love. Avis helped hide it. Tlesia was punished, left to die. This manuscript isn't sublimated, it's direct. You show it to Clarice. She traces the image of the women, then kisses you. "I see you," she says. "You're breathing your own air." You give the manuscript to Wulfhilda, who hides it under the floorboards. Powerful. Dangerous. The revolt begins with a missing spoon. Sister Theoda is struck, and the younger sisters watch silently. They don't weep. They organize. Small acts, upside-down pages, a misplaced pleat. "They're waking up," Avis murmurs. Clarice calls it the quiet fuse. None uprisings happened. The abbess cracks down, but the girls don't break. Obedience is a veil, I can see through it, is carved into a cot. When a small relic goes missing, Sister Hildegard is accused. The abbess demands trial by ordeal, hot iron. Wulfhilda prepares salve, but knows what this means. Hildegard walks 3 steps, the iron burning. Her wounds fester. Verdict, guilty, demoted, you vomit. Hildegard whispers, "Sister Joan." I saw her. She was innocent. Avis confirms it's about control, not truth. After this, the quiet rebellion dims. A letter arrives from Rome, carried by a frantic courier. Wulfhilda senses it's from the inquisitorial branch. A warning. Rebecca carries old documents into the abbess's chamber. The abbess announces a spiritual review. Avis hurries to hide something in the archives. "He didn't come for prayer," she whispers, shaking. She hands you a bundle of crudely stitched pages, a confession from Sister Elodia, 2 generations ago. She writes of a visitation by the Holy Father. One nun became pregnant, the child lived, was taken. The bloodline continued. This wasn't rare. Popes had children. Elodia's letter hints at a pope's child fathered here. You show it to Clarice. "So the pope came here?" she asks. "And the abbess knows. She is the line." Clarice laughs. "Then what is she guarding? This place or herself?" You realize the abbess's fear is about protecting her lineage. You ask Wulfhilda, "Papal blood in a nun? That's a heresy too dangerous to write down." Sister Magdala is quietly removed. You suspect she knew too much. You move Elodia's letter, hiding it beneath the altar, inside the relic holding St. Aurelia's bones. Let the saints keep secrets for once. The abbess grows paler, whispers purge. Bloodlines don't disappear. They go underground. You're thrown into the reflection cell for asking about Magdala. Isolation. You carve a V for voice on the wall. Clarice slips in with food, a copy of the letter she made. "Magdala knew," she whispers. Wulfhilda brings a tonic. You are released. Your body aches, but your mind is sharper. The abbess warns you you're not invincible, but you're no longer obedient. New carvings appear. Sanguis loquitur. The blood speaks. Lavender is braided into the altar cloth. Clarice slips you a note. We're ready. The priest locks the tabernacle. The abbess sleeps with a dagger. A letter appears on the gate. The child's name was Clara. The line remains. The bishop returns with 2 inquisitors. They ask you about Clara. You deny everything. Sister Benedetta is taken by the inquisitors. "To a cell or a pit or a fire," Wulfhilda murmurs. "This is all because of Clara, and because we didn't forget." Avis gathers the others. They can't wait. Wulfhilda has a plan. Smuggle the copy of the letter out. Clarice insists she will go. "They already suspect you. If I disappear, they'll assume you're innocent. At least you'll be free." Clarice leaves under cover of darkness, carrying the letter stitched into her robe. She doesn't look back. Messages were smuggled out via herbalists. The church wrote history with gold, but women wrote it with silence. The next day, the convent pretends normalcy. The inquisitors search, but won't find the letter. Or you. You and Clarice hide in a monk's shelter Wulfhilda told you about. That's where you'll breathe free. You build a fire, spread out the pages, not just Elodia's confession, but Talesia's poems, Avis's notes, Wulfhilda's chants, and your own scribbles. We write it all, you nod. You write until your fingers cramp, until the manuscript forms. Recordare. Remember, such manuscripts written by runaway nuns did exist. On the fourth day, Theoda arrives with Sister Agnes and another novice. They brought food. You were right to leave, Theoda says. They've been forced to recite obedience. But the church does bleed, Agnes adds. They think Benedetta knows where you are. They've stopped feeding her. You give Theoda the first 8 pages of Recordare. Distribute it. It's not just nuns who need this. It spreads like mycelium. You and Clarice finish the final page, signing it with a symbol, 3 overlapping circles, body, voice, lineage. You bury it under the old ash tree. The convent was never pure. It was fertile. The abbess is dying. Wulfhilda confirms it's not illness, but rot. Sister Rebecca takes control, but it's too late. Recordare is blooming. Poems in linen closets. Sketches carved under pews. Verses hummed during embroidery. The novices carry it. You and Clarice return. Not to stay, but to finish the work. You slip through a storm drain. In the chapel, the abbess is barely breathing. You leave the final page beside her pillow. Let the stones remember what the saints forgot. Let the wound become a window. She whispers a sound like a closing door. You burn the fake copy of Recordare. Let them think it's over. Months pass. You and Clarice live as healers in a southern village. Avis sends letters. Theoda codes messages in pressed flowers. Benedetta copies pages of Recordare into saints' lives. The manuscript is alive. Clarice brings news. The abbess died. Rebecca tried to take her place, but no one bowed. They chose Wulfhilda. The priest refused, so the sisters locked him out of the chapel. Years later, you return. Theoda is now abbess. Wulfhilda runs the infirmary. Benedetta teaches scripture. Agnes oversees the garden, renaming herbs after Avis. Avis is still writing. Clarice walks beside you. The manuscript has grown. 12 copies, hidden in dresses under tiles, etched into combs. Truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be whispered and remembered. Tonight, by the fire, you close your eyes and think, we did not vanish. We were written. Hey guys, tonight we're not starting with some dusty philosopher or a fancy king. Nope, we're diving into something far more dangerous, complicated, and frankly hilarious. Dating in the Middle Ages. Because believe it or not, finding love in a time of plagues, dowries, and chaperones was somehow even more awkward than texting someone, "What you doing?" at 2 a.m. From courtly love songs that sound suspiciously like therapy sessions to marriage by livestock negotiation, medieval romance was less about butterflies and more about land rights. It was a chaotic, unromantic ballet of economics, social standing, and the ever-present threat of dysentery. Before we begin our chaperoned journey. So, before you get comfortable, maybe grab a goblet of something strong. Mead, anyone? Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe light a candle for that authentic medieval ambience, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Try not to trip over any stray peasants on your way to a comfortable sitting position. No swiping right, just arranged fights and marriages. So you're standing in a medieval village, or maybe a chilly stone castle, wondering how to find love. Maybe strike up a conversation, compliment someone's hose, ask if they come here often. Nope, that's not how any of this works. If you're in the Middle Ages, dating in the modern sense doesn't really exist. You don't flirt, text, or go for long walks to see where it goes. Instead, your parents or your lord or your abbot are already deciding who you'll marry, when, and how many cows it will take to seal the deal. Think of it as an extreme form of pre-screening, where your personal happiness ranks somewhere below. Does this alliance secure that crucial wheat field? If you're a noble, you've probably been betrothed since before your voice dropped. Your crib likely came with a pre-assigned future spouse's coat of arms painted on it. You and your future spouse might meet for the first time on your actual wedding day. And yes, that's just as uncomfortable as it sounds. Imagine saying I do to someone whose name you just learned, and whose most defining feature is their family's suspiciously large pig farm. The whole thing is about land titles and family alliances, solidifying power, securing borders, and definitely not about compatibility or how good they are at lute solos. Because who cares about common interests when there's a duchy on the line? If you're a peasant, things are slightly less formal, but only slightly. Your family still has a strong say, and love isn't really part of the discussion. Love was for wandering minstrels and those tragically doomed poets. For you, it was about practicality. Maybe your parents know a nice girl whose family owns a productive goat, which, let's be honest, is a pretty compelling argument for marriage. Maybe they admire a boy who can thatch a roof without falling off, a surprisingly rare and valuable skill. Boom! You're courting now. Lucky you, your life just became marginally less difficult, assuming your new spouse also pulls their weight. It's not that people in the Middle Ages don't feel romantic. They do. They just do it in secret, or in their poems, or with a lot of wistful sighing. It's just not the priority. The goal is survival, inheritance, and social stability. Falling in love before marriage? That's risky. It implies personal choice, and that's just messy. Falling in love outside of marriage? That's scandalous. Either way, it's frowned upon. Unless you're a character in a tragic poem, in which case go wild. Just expect to die dramatically at the end. And yet, you dream. Maybe you write a little verse on a scrap of parchment hidden beneath your straw mattress. Maybe you sneak a glance across the market at someone who doesn't smell entirely of livestock. Maybe, just maybe, you fall for someone who wasn't pre-approved by your family's livestock appraiser. But for now, you wait, you obey. You try not to fall for the miller's apprentice, no matter how dashing he looks with flour in his beard. Because in this world, love might be the goal of poets, but marriage is the work of parents, priests, and politics. And frankly, politics rarely involves grand romantic gestures. Your medieval dating profile, all about the assets, and lack thereof. So, you think someone's cute? Maybe it's the way they balance a basket of onions on their head with surprising grace. Maybe it's the confident, rhythmic way they beat mud off a rug. Your medieval heart skips a beat, a tiny, terrified flutter. But steady yourself, because in this world, romance doesn't bloom without a balance sheet. Before you even think about courtship, you'd better ask, what do I bring to the table? And if your answer is a charming personality, you might want to sit down. You're about to be very disappointed. If you're a young man, you'll need land or livestock or tools or a roof that doesn't leak too much. Seriously, a dry roof was practically the equivalent of a trust fund. Love letters are nice, but nothing says husband material, like 2 healthy oxen and a roof that can survive a mild storm without collapsing onto your future in-laws. If your father has already promised the best goat to your brother, well, you might want to consider the priesthood. It's a stable career, and the celibacy means you don't have to worry about dowries. Win-win, right? If you're a young woman, your family needs a dowry. That could be coin, clothing, a bed, or a suspiciously generous number of geese. It doesn't matter how witty you are, how beautiful your embroidery, or how well you can sing ancient ballads. If your family can't pay up, you're likely to spend a long time perfecting your embroidery alone, possibly becoming a very skilled spinster. You'd be lucky to even get a sniff of a husband without some tangible assets. Now, let's say you actually like someone who makes your calloused heart flutter. You lock eyes at the well, a moment of pure, unadulterated medieval rom-com. There's a spark. It's romantic. It's poetic. It's completely irrelevant. Because unless your families are on equal financial footing, you might as well fall in love with a cloud, or a particularly attractive scarecrow. If you're noble, it gets worse. Your hand in marriage isn't just a personal choice. It's tied to land borders, political favours, and generations of ancestral grudges. You're not just a person. You're a walking treaty, a living, breathing land deed. Congratulations. Even peasants aren't safe from the economic realities. Marriage is practical. You don't marry for butterflies. You marry because your pig pen borders someone else's wheat field, and a joint venture would optimize manure distribution. You dream of passion. You settle for irrigation rights. And maybe, just maybe, they don't chew with their mouth open. And yet, you try. Maybe you offer a small gift, a carved spoon, a handful of berries, or your finest slightly cracked mug. A truly extravagant gesture if it's your only mug. Maybe they smile, maybe they don't. But the truth remains, in medieval dating, economics is the flirting, and love is just a bonus you hope your spouse develops eventually. It's like buying a house for the roof and hoping you eventually like the wallpaper. Courtly love, the original friend zone, with more loots and less contact. So let's say you're not a peasant worrying about pigs or a noble dealing with treaties. Let's say you're a knight, shiny armour, big horse, questionable poetry skills, and probably a chronic case of helmet hair. What's your love life like? Welcome to the strange and emotionally exhausting world of courtly love. Now, this isn't dating. This is performance art. It's like a medieval reality show where the prize is eternal, unrequited devotion. Courtly love was a noble pastime, part flirting, part spiritual suffering, and entirely impractical. You, the brave knight, choose a noble lady, usually one who's already married because drama and unreachability are key ingredients, and vow to adore her from afar. Not physically, of course. That would ruin everything, and likely result in a very unpleasant trip to the gallows. No, you're supposed to suffer elegantly. You might compose a few tortured verses about her silver laugh, or how her hair burns like the sun, which in medieval terms means she has hair and didn't insult your family. You wear her colours at tournaments, you pine, you sigh. You occasionally joust someone just because he glanced at her too long, all while maintaining an air of profound yet distant adoration. The lady's role? She's supposed to pretend this is all very flattering while maintaining a level of icy detachment that would terrify a glacier. She may respond with a letter, a token, maybe a ribbon, but mostly she'll just be mysterious and unattainable, which is the entire point. The emotions are high, the actual contact minimal. At best, you might get a nod from across the hall, or a finger brushed against your gauntlet during a feast. Anything more, and suddenly it's not courtly love, it's a scandal, or worse, adultery. And no one wants that. At least not officially. It's like a perpetual, high-stakes game of I Spy, where no one ever actually finds anything. This entire setup worked best when everyone involved agreed it was mostly pretend. It was a sophisticated game, a way to express longing, devotion, and creative angst, all without disrupting the social order, a medieval venting mechanism, if you will, for all those inconvenient feelings. Was it dramatic? Absolutely. Did it involve more poetry than practicality? Constantly. Did it lead to actual relationships? Rarely. But for a knight stuck between battles and boredom, courtly love gave you something to write about, someone to write for, and an excuse to look dramatically wistful. Just don't expect a happy ending, or a kiss, or even sustained eye contact. You'll be lucky to get a slightly less judgmental glance. Medieval texting, the token system. Less emojis, more smelly garments. So you've fallen for someone. Great! Now comes the hard part, expressing that affection in a society where touching someone's hand without a chaperone is basically a declaration of war, and public displays of affection are punishable by public shaming. Or worse, a very long sermon. Welcome to the medieval solution. Tokens. Think of it as 12th century texting. Slow, confusing, and open to wildly inaccurate interpretation. Plus, there was no delete button if you sent the wrong item. Let's say you're a knight and you're hopelessly in love with Lady Marjorie of whatever her last name is. You can't speak to her alone, and your poems keep getting intercepted by her confessor, who seems to have a suspiciously keen eye for thinly veiled romantic metaphors. What do? You send her a glove. or maybe your embroidered sleeve. Nothing says, "I love you," like mailing someone part of your wardrobe, possibly still smelling faintly of horse and battle. And if you're on the receiving end, congratulations. You now have a sweaty linen sleeve you didn't ask for and the romantic burden of pretending you know what it means. Is he confessing love? Asking for a favour? Suggesting a duel? Demanding his laundry be done? Who knows? The ambiguity was half the fun and all the stress. Women gave tokens too. A ribbon, a piece of hair, less creepy back then apparently, a tiny pendant. It was sentimental, sure, but also deeply strategic. Give the wrong guy the wrong token and suddenly you're spoken for by someone with a lazy eye and a chronic drinking problem. Accidental engagements were a real risk. Tokens were meant to be subtle. A glove pinned to your chest, a ribbon tied to your sword hilt. Everyone knew what it meant, and no one said what it meant. The more cryptic, the better. It was less about communication and more about plausible deniability. Oh, this glove? No, it's not from Lady Joan. It just appeared on my pillow, scented with lavender. Completely random. A gift from a wandering fairy, perhaps. For commoners, tokens were simpler. Maybe a wood carving, maybe a handkerchief you stitched when you weren't milking something. It was still romantic, just with more calluses and fewer delicate perfumes involved. Tokens were also risky. Giving one to the wrong person could spark rumours faster than a runaway cart. Receiving one you didn't want meant figuring out how to politely return someone's sock without insulting their lineage. But for all the awkwardness, these tokens carried real emotional weight. They were symbols of love in a world that didn't allow much room for it, a secret language whispered through fabric and wood. Chaperones, the original parental controls, with more nuns. So you finally build up the courage to talk to your crush. Maybe offer them a flower. Maybe quote a little bad poetry you definitely didn't steal from a travelling minstrel. You're ready for a moment of intimacy, a quiet exchange of meaningful glances. Unfortunately, you're not alone. Welcome to the world of medieval dating surveillance, where love is never blind. It's heavily monitored by your mother, your priest, and nosy cousin, and sometimes all three at once, often armed with disapproving glares and knitting needles. Let's say you're a young woman of marrying age. You're never just going for a walk. You're going for a walk with Margaret and her terrifyingly strict aunt, who's already judging your posture, your breathing, and the moral fibre of your soul. Even if you're simply fetching water from the well, someone is watching. Someone is always watching. It's less dating, more espionage, with the added pressure of maintaining an unblemished reputation. And if you're a man trying to court someone, better hope you have the approval of her family, her parish priest, and the local gossip network. You show up at her house with flowers. Her father's behind the door, sharpening something vaguely threatening. Her mother's pretending to stir a pot that hasn't boiled in 3 hours, but somehow still manages to look menacing. And the village priest just happens to be passing by on his way to morning prayers at sunset, with a remarkably keen interest in your conversational topics. The logic behind all this supervision was simple. Protect virtue, preserve family honour, and absolutely prevent any unsanctioned touching, especially before marriage, especially alone, especially ever. Chaperones were there to monitor innocent interactions. Group outings, monitored walks, supervised sitting within a 2-metre radius of each other on a bench, only if someone's grandmother is knitting nearby and pretending not to listen. Even a shared glance could be dissected and analysed for signs of impropriety. The church, of course, had opinions. Lots of them. It regulated courtship the way a bouncer regulates a nightclub, but with more fire and brimstone sermons. Priests gave sermons about proper conduct and wrote lengthy treatises on the dangers of flirtation. Yes, that's right. Medieval clergy published anti-flirting manuals. Imagine someone copying those out by candlelight, painstakingly illustrating the proper way to avoid eye contact, while monks silently judge you from across the scriptorium. Even letter writing wasn't safe. Some monasteries opened love letters just to screen for moral content. That's right, divine censorship, ensuring your passionate words were suitably pious. So if you want to fall in love, you'll have to get used to doing it quietly, in whispers, and always in the presence of your entire extended family, possibly God, and definitely that one neighbour who always knows everyone's business. Privacy? What's that? The secret love letter, snail mail but with more risk, and herring. So you're in love, or at least medieval in love, which is mostly longing, confusion, and a lot of pacing near windows, wondering if you'll ever get a moment alone with your beloved. You've exchanged glances across a feast. Maybe they picked up your dropped handkerchief and didn't immediately throw it into the fire. A promising sign. The tension is unbearable, but you still can't speak freely. There are chaperones, priests, mothers lurking like emotional border patrol agents, ready to pounce on any hint of unsanctioned romance. So what do? You write a letter. Ah, yes, the secret love letter, the most dangerous piece of parchment since the excommunication notice. This is your chance to confess your heart, using the most cryptic, overly poetic language possible, because directness is a one-way ticket to the stockades. You can't just say, "I like you." Oh no. You must say, "My soul is a stag pierced by the arrow of your grace, roaming the forests of yearning, much like my stomach after this morning's stale bread." Naturally, if you're literate, which, let's be honest, isn't a given for everyone, especially if you're not a monk or a noble scribe, you painstakingly pen your message on vellum or rough parchment. If you're really dedicated, you dust it with flower petals or perfume, adding a touch of romance and perhaps attracting a few curious insects. Just be careful with that. One noble accidentally used a love letter to wrap a herring and delivered it to the wrong girl. They're married now. It's fine. Probably. Now comes the problem of delivery. You can't just hand it over. You need a courier, a loyal servant, a bribed monk, or a younger sibling with limited understanding of consequences and a surprising knack for subterfuge. Sometimes even a wandering minstrel would do the job, singing your poem in the town square while pretending it was anonymous. Subtle and risky. Very risky. The line between romantic and heresy was thinner than a pauper's cloak during Lent. If your metaphor even hinted at anything physical, you might find yourself confessing to both lust and literary exaggeration. But despite all the rules, people did write. Some letters survived, preserved by sheer luck or the meticulousness of later historians. Some poems were copied and passed around like forbidden fruit, whispering tales of forbidden passion. In a world of rigid rules and constant supervision, a folded scrap of words could feel revolutionary, a tiny act of rebellion in a sea of conformity. So you write. You risk it. You press your trembling hand to the parchment and say everything you can't say aloud. Just don't sign it too clearly. You want romance, not a church trial, and definitely not your name on the town gossip scroll. Festivals, your one shot at public flirting, under the gaze of all your relatives. Finally, a break, a feast day, a harvest festival, a maypole dance. In short, a rare moment when your life isn't just work, prayer, and pretending you're not interested in the blacksmith's daughter, who, let's be fair, has surprisingly strong arms. Today, you're allowed to flirt. Sort of. As long as no one sees, or everyone sees, but pretends not to. Welcome to medieval festivals where romance blooms under the watchful eyes of everyone you've ever met, and 3 particularly judgmental chickens. Festivals were one of the few socially approved moments when men and women could mingle, laugh, and dare we say, make eye contact that lasted longer than a nervous blink. There's music, there's ale, often watery, but it helps. There's someone wearing a flower crown with dangerous confidence. You've never seen so many people not pretending to be miserable. It's almost fun. If you're a peasant, you might try to impress your crush by winning the sack race, proving your agility and stamina, catching a greased pig, demonstrating your strength and cunning, or juggling 3 stale rolls of bread, a surprisingly popular talent apparently. Nothing says I'm available and capable like falling off a hay bale with dignity and a winning smile. Dancing was your best shot at actual physical contact. The rules were rigid, but a well-timed spin or a not-quite-accidental hand graze could say more than any poem, if executed subtly enough to avoid a chaperone's wrath. The maypole dance, for example, was basically a giant excuse for coordinated flirtation wrapped in ribbons and plausible deniability. Oh, my hand just happened to brush yours as we spun around the pole, how utterly unexpected. And if you're noble, your version of flirting at a festival involved less hay and more poetry. You might compose a verse on the spot, compare your lady's eyes to twin candles or other glowing things, anything that doesn't sound like a farm animal, and offer a trinket, hopefully not one that was clearly made by your servant 5 minutes earlier from a piece of old scrap metal. Food helped too. Offer your beloved a meat pie or share a honey cake. If they accept it with a smile, you're doing well. If they hand it to their dog without making eye contact, consider your efforts a noble failure and move on to the next potential suitor. But remember, everything you do, someone is watching. A parent, a priest, a bard with a big mouth. One misstep, and your flirty smile becomes a youthful indiscretion discussed at church for the next 6 weeks, or worse, ends up in a satirical song performed by that very bard. Still, for a few hours you can pretend. Pretend you're in a world where love isn't a transaction, where laughter isn't suspicious, and where dancing in public doesn't end in penance. It's a rare, fleeting glimpse of something almost resembling modern romance. Peasant courtship, just like Tinder, but with more manure and less profile customization. Let's say you're not a knight, a noble, or a bard with a lute and excessive feelings. You're a regular villager. You wake up with the cows, go to bed with the chickens, and spend most of your day ankle-deep in mud. You're not looking for a poetic soulmate. You're looking for someone who can milk a goat without emotional drama, and preferably smells only mostly of farm. Welcome to peasant courtship, where romance is practical, gestures are modest, and chemistry means we can survive winter together without wanting to murder each other. In your world, dating is less about long conversations and more about shared tasks. You notice someone you like because they work hard, don't complain much, and have a decent set of teeth. A major plus. That's it. That's the whole checklist. You're not picky, you're realistic. You don't need fireworks, you need someone who can gut a fish and maybe doesn't snore too loudly, because shared huts offer limited escape options. So how do you show interest? You give gifts, small, useful things. A basket of eggs, a bundle of firewood, a good turnip, a surprisingly valued commodity. And if you're feeling bold, maybe a woven ribbon or a carved spoon. Nothing says I'm serious about you like a spoon you whittled by candlelight while your pig judged you silently from the corner. It shows dedication. Conversations happen during shared chores. You might walk together to the mill, chat while tending sheep or exchange pleasantries while shoveling something that smells questionable. No one's reciting poetry. You're talking about the weather, crop yields, and whether or not old Thomas fell in the well again. Spoiler, he probably did. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And yet, in its own way, it's romantic. There's a sweetness in the simplicity, a shared life built not on idealism, but on cooperation and sheer necessity. You know each other's strengths, weaknesses, and how fast they run when a goat escapes. Proposals often came quickly. If you both agreed, and the families did too, marriage followed. Maybe you moved into a shared hut. Maybe you built a new one from scratch with help from the village. You brought your best blanket. They brought a goat. Together you began the strange miracle of domestic survival. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. You've done it. You found someone who can cook, clean, tolerate your family, and doesn't visibly recoil at the sight of your feet. True love, right? Or at least, true practicality. Marriage. More contract than cuddles, and a lot of livestock exchange. Now it's time to get married, which in medieval terms means you're entering into a contract. Not a dreamy vow under the stars, but a legally binding transaction, often negotiated with all the passion and emotional nuance of a livestock auction. I'll give you 3 cows and a slightly lame donkey for your daughter, and that patch of turnips. If you're a peasant, it's still a big deal. You gather a few witnesses, talk to the local priest, who probably hurries things along, he's got other weddings, and try not to trip over the Latin during the ceremony. But behind the sweet-sounding blessings is a serious checklist. Dowry, land rights, who gets the cow, and what happens if someone dies during planting season. Ah, yes, romance. The prenuptial agreement was just assumed and far more binding. If you're from the upper class, buckle up. Your marriage is a full-blown legal negotiation. Your parents, their parents, the priest, the scribe, maybe a cousin who once studied law. They're all in on it. The bride and groom are mostly just standing nearby, looking decorative and nodding when spoken to, like oddly well-dressed furniture. You may or may not have even met the person you're marrying. Your family has done the math. Your estate needs her fields, her dowry balances your debts, and both of your coats of arms look good next to each other on the official merger document. Love is optional. The merger is not. It's less a wedding, more a hostile takeover of two family assets. And once you're married, it's permanent. Divorce isn't really a thing unless you can prove someone wasn't baptized. Good luck with that. Was secretly related to you. Happened disturbingly often due to small gene pools and less than strict record keeping. Or died and forgot to mention it. Annulments existed, but they required a lot of paperwork, a bit of luck, and a solid bribe. Your marriage is invalid because, the moon was in the wrong phase. Still, not everything is bleak. Some couples genuinely grew to love each other. Shared chores, raising children, surviving winters, battling plagues. These things have a way of building affection, or at least tolerance, which in medieval terms is basically the same thing. The church was involved in every step. Marriage was a holy sacrament, one of the 7 big ones. You didn't just marry for legal reasons, you married because God needed a witness. Possibly 2, just to be sure. So you stand, exchange vows, and smile as someone hands over a sack of onions and calls it a blessing. Just try not to cry when the onions inevitably make your eyes water. Eloping, the OG scandal, where love literally burns down family trees. So, let's say you've had enough. Enough contracts, enough negotiations, enough being treated like a particularly valuable sack of flour. You're a noble, but for once, you want to marry for love. Not for land, not for lineage, not for your father's strategic ambitions, which usually involve more sheep than you care to count. Just love. Congratulations! You're about to cause a scandal of epic proportions. Noble elopements were the medieval equivalent of lighting your family tree on fire and dancing in the ashes. If you ran off to marry someone of your own choosing, it wasn't just personal rebellion, it was political sabotage on a grand scale. You were basically declaring war on your own family, your lord, and possibly the entire social order. Let's say you're Lady Eleonora, promised to some boring von estate secure, a man whose most exciting quality is his consistent tax payments, but you've fallen madly in love with a penniless squire who smells faintly of horses and adventure and actually makes you laugh, a rare and dangerous commodity. You meet in secret, whisper sweet nothings in the stables, and one day you vanish off to a monastery where the abbot owes you a favour. There, you marry under questionable legality, with only a nervous monk and 2 very confused chickens as witnesses. Back at home, chaos. Your family is outraged beyond words, probably throwing expensive pottery. Your father is threatening to siege the groom's family garden, a surprisingly effective military tactic. Your mother is crying into her embroidery hoop, stitching furious condemnations of your life choices. The church is deeply concerned about this breach of holy matrimony and property law. And the gossip? Oh, the gossip is delicious, spread faster than the plague through the entire kingdom. And if you're the groom in this romantic rebellion, don't get too comfortable. Best case scenario, you get to keep your bride and your kneecaps. Worst case, you're excommunicated and disemboweled, in that order, while your bride is dragged back to her family and married off to a much older, less adventurous, and possibly toothless lord. Still, some couples got away with it. If the union couldn't be undone without causing even more embarrassment and potential bloodshed, families sometimes just sighed, threw up their hands, and moved on. After all, what's done is done, and at least nobody died. Hopefully. In rare cases, these scandals became legends. Songs were written, poems composed, stories whispered at banquets. 2 nobles who chose love over duty. Practically mythological, figures of scandalous heroism. And yes, most noble marriages were transactional, but these moments, brief rebellions, passionate escapes, whispered vows beneath moonlit towers, they reminded the world that love, though inconvenient and highly risky, refused to go extinct. It just found more dramatic ways to manifest. Dowries and bride prices, it's all about the goods and the receipt. Ah, marriage. That beautiful union of 2 souls and their respective financial portfolios. Because in the Middle Ages, love was nice, but a dowry? Now that was truly romantic. and quantifiable. Let's say you're a bride. You're not just getting married, you're being launched like a small, dowry-equipped economic vessel. Your family prepares your dowry with meticulous care. Money, livestock, a good strong cow's gold, land, linens, a bed, crucial, and maybe even a set of pewter dishes if they're feeling particularly generous. These offerings go to your future husband, who accepts you and your portable wealth with open arms and a mental calculator already whirring. It's a package deal, and the package better be impressive. Now flip the scenario. In some cultures or regions, it's not the bride's family giving the goods, it's the bride price. The groom pays her family for the honour of marrying her, effectively saying, "Here's a horse, a cloak, and 3 pigs. Now give me your daughter, and please ensure she knows how to churn butter." Medieval romance at its finest. The point is, someone is paying someone. You're getting married, and there is absolutely a receipt involved, probably notarized by a very serious-looking scribe. These exchanges weren't just about wealth, they were about status, expectations, and public statements. A large dowry might indicate a bride came from a prestigious family, signalling her worth. A stingy one might suggest they were trying to offload her quickly, possibly due to suspicious personality traits, or a habit of talking back, a definite red flag in those times. You, as the bride, didn't usually get to keep your dowry. It became part of the household economy, managed by your husband, guarded by the law, and hopefully not gambled away on dice and ale within the first month of marriage. If the marriage ended through death, annulment, or your husband wandering off to join a monastery after a particularly bad midlife crisis, your dowry could theoretically be returned. But retrieving it was often harder than pulling a sword from a stone, requiring endless legal battles and the patience of a saint. You'd need support, legal backing, and ideally, someone who could read complex Latin contracts. Meanwhile, the bride price, if paid, was like buying a rare goat, expensive up front and no refunds. It compensated the bride's family for the loss of her labour. After all, who's going to milk the sheep now? So while love was occasionally in the mix, money was always at the altar performing a silent but very important dance. It was less about, "I love you," and more about, "I can afford you." Forbidden love in the cloister, nuns, monks, and very awkward confessions, and babies. So you didn't go the marriage route. Maybe you were the second son, and therefore without inheritance, or your dowry was suspiciously small, or you just really like chanting. Either way, you've joined a monastery or convent. Congratulations. You've now taken a vow of poverty, chastity, and an aggressive disinterest in romance. And yet, here you are, in a stone cloister, surrounded by silence, candle smoke, and Brother Anselm's unexpectedly soulful eyes, which seem to linger just a moment too long during Vespers. Yes, even behind monastery walls, forbidden love found a way. To be clear, falling in love in a religious order was deeply discouraged. Like, you might get whipped, exiled, or lectured by someone with a Latin name so long it takes a minute to pronounce discouraged. You've sworn to give your heart entirely to God, which means giving it to literally no one else, and certainly not the handsome new novice. But hearts are unruly, even under a habit, and sometimes prayers start sounding a lot like love poems, especially during those long, quiet hours of contemplation. Maybe it starts with innocent tasks, passing each other bread in the refectory, whispering during Vespers, laughing a little too hard when someone drops a hymn book, a truly scandalous outburst. Before you know it, you're tucking extra cheese into Sister Beatrice's satchel during mealtimes, and questioning everything you've ever believed about celibacy. Some monks and nuns wrote passionate letters, disguised, of course, as theological musings. Your soul is a shining light in the darkness of my contemplation, much like the moon reflecting on the dew-kissed monastery garden, where I happen to be at midnight, hypothetically speaking. Sounds holy unless you read between the lines. And many did. There were inevitably scandals, secret meetings in the herb garden, surprisingly romantic until you get caught, midnight confessions that weren't strictly sacramental, and probably involved more hand-holding than spiritual guidance, and the occasional gasp-worthy discovery of a nun with a suspiciously round belly, which was hard to explain away as too much communion bread. The punishment? Usually harsh. Exile, public penance, being locked in a tiny cell for months, or being reassigned to some far-off abbey known mostly for sheep and silence, where your only companion would be a very judgmental shepherd. Still, not all stories ended in disgrace. Some lovers escaped, vanishing into the night, hoping to find a place where their love wasn't a sin. A few even got married after being defrocked, trading holy vows for secular ones. Most, though, returned to their cloisters, red-faced and redevoted, swearing that the whole thing was just an overzealous theological debate or a particularly vivid dream. Because in the end, monastic life was about discipline and rigid adherence to rules. But humans are humans, even in robes, even in silence, and sometimes a quiet glance across the chapel or a shared forbidden laugh was more thrilling than any tournament or courtly poem. It proved that love, like a stubborn weed, would grow even in the cracks of the holiest stone walls. Marital disappointment. When "till death do us part" feels like a threat, and annulments are a bureaucratic nightmare. You did it! You got married! There was a priest, a pig roast, someone spilled mead on your mother's only nice cloak, and you signed your life away. But now it's been a few months, or years, and something feels off. Maybe your spouse snores like a dying lute being played by a very large bear. Maybe they forgot to mention their chronic gambling problem. Or maybe you just realise that marrying for land and sheep doesn't automatically result in romantic bliss. Either way, welcome to the world of medieval marital disappointment. Now, don't go reaching for the divorce papers because they don't exist, at least not in any form you'd recognise. Marriage was a sacred and unbreakable bond, approved by the church, sealed by God, and enforced by public shame. You could try for an annulment, but you'd need a very good reason. We don't get along, they smell, or they keep hogging the communal blanket doesn't cut it. You'd have to prove that one of you was underage, meaning the marriage was never valid to begin with, already married to someone else, a rare but exciting twist, too closely related, which happened disturbingly often due to small insular communities, or, best case scenario, never consummated the marriage, which meant someone, usually a very awkward church official, had to confirm that fact in writing, possibly under oath. Good luck with that intimate conversation. It was a bureaucratic nightmare designed to keep you trapped. If you're a noble, it gets messier. Your marriage wasn't just personal, it was political, a delicate tapestry of alliances and land holdings. Trying to escape it could start a feud, ignite a scandal that rocked the kingdom, or even launch a minor war over disputed goat pastures. Best to just quietly resent each other, attend separate feasts, and perhaps cultivate a very dramatic hobby. So what do unhappy couples do? Mostly, they just endure. You sleep in different beds, if you're lucky enough to have two. You sigh dramatically at dinner. You pour your feelings into embroidery, or that one really angry psalm you like to hum loudly. Passive aggression becomes your love language, expressed through burnt bread or mysteriously missing socks. Of course, affairs happened, usually quietly, sometimes spectacularly. Nobles had secret lovers. Peasants had suspiciously helpful neighbours who always seemed to be helping with chores. The church condemned it, of course, with fiery sermons, but that didn't stop people. It just made them better at sneaking around barns and blaming things on God's mysterious will, or perhaps the influence of mischievous forest sprites. For women, getting out of a bad marriage was especially hard. Even if your husband was violent or vanished, society expected you to stay loyal, silent and mildly pious, while surviving off breadcrumbs and disapproval from the entire village. Still, some people made it work. Marriages weren't always happy, but they could become partnerships, forged by hardship, habit, and the shared experience of hauling firewood in the rain. Sometimes that's all the romance you need. Widowhood, a slightly freer second chance, but don't delay. Let's say your spouse dies. Maybe it was the plague, maybe a farm accident involving a very aggressive cow. Maybe they tripped over a goose in the dark and fractured their neck. It happens. However it happened, you're now widowed, and suddenly the medieval dating pool opens back up, often with alarming speed. Being a widow in the Middle Ages was oddly liberating. Not do whatever you want liberating, but certainly more freedom than you had before. For women especially, widowhood often brought a taste of independence, managing land, making decisions, even speaking in public without being immediately shushed by a male relative. And if you were youngish and still had teeth, you could remarry quickly. Very quickly. Mourning periods existed, but so did survival instincts. A widow with land and no husband was basically a walking treasure chest, and suitors would appear with alarming speed, some sincere, others just very enthusiastic about your dairy cows. If you're a man and recently widowed, society practically pushes you back into marriage. Who else is going to cook, clean and raise the 11 children you somehow accumulated and miraculously kept alive? So you start looking. Maybe the baker's daughter, who makes surprisingly good sourdough. Maybe that quiet widow who always brings suspiciously good mead to market. Romance in second marriages could be surprisingly sweet. This time around, you're older, wiser, and ideally, slightly less naive about the realities of cohabitation. You're not being pushed into an alliance. You're choosing someone to survive with. Maybe even someone you like. Wild concept. Of course, there were rules. The church frowned on remarriage that happened too quickly, like your spouse isn't cold yet quickly, and widows often had to negotiate with family over dowries and inheritance, turning a potential second chance at love into a very awkward legal battle. Nothing says romantic second chance like arguing with your brother-in-law over who keeps the butter churn. But still, second marriages were common, even expected. Life was short, winters were long, and loneliness was a harsh mistress. No one wanted to spend them alone if they didn't have to. And yes, love was part of it. Maybe not the swooning, sonnet-writing kind, but the quiet kind based on shared stories, mutual respect, and the understanding that both of you had already seen some things, survived some things, and just wanted a warm body next to them at night that didn't snore too loudly. So you light the fire, pour the soup, and try again. Not because it's perfect, but because it's human. Cosmic compatibility. When the stars and your aunt's premonition decide your love life, you've made it this far. Survived the contracts, the courtships, the chaperones, and possibly a dramatic barn elopement. You've endured the practicalities and the surveillance, but before you fall for someone new, ask yourself the most medieval question of all. Are you cosmically allowed to love this person? Because in the Middle Ages, love wasn't just a matter of the heart. It was a matter of stars, bones, and whether or not your grandmother saw a fox this morning. All legitimate concerns for compatibility. Let's begin with astrology. Yes, before you even thought about kissing anyone, you might want to consult the local monk astrologer, who moonlighted, obviously. Are your signs compatible? Is Venus in retrograde? Was your beloved born under an unlucky moon? If so, better to marry someone less cursed, even if they have a suspiciously large nose. Love is hard enough without planetary sabotage. Then there were birthmarks. Mysterious little symbols that might identify you as your soulmate's long-lost twin, or their destined executioner. Superstitions were flexible like that. A mole in the shape of a pig, clearly destined for a peasant, a birthmark resembling a crown, get ready for nobility, and a birthmark resembling a dismembered limb. Probably best to stay single. But the church had its own checklist, stricter than any astrological chart. You couldn't marry your cousin, or your second cousin, or your fourth cousin twice removed, unless you had special permission, which the wealthy often bought, because loopholes existed for the right price, even with God. So before things got serious, you'd probably need to draw a family tree and then quietly erase parts of it, especially those embarrassing branches. Social status also mattered deeply, perhaps more than anything else. A noble could not fall in love with a peasant without it being declared either a miracle, if the noble was very, very pious, and the peasant was suspiciously saintly, or a moral failing, the usual outcome. Cross-class romance was rare, scandalous, and only acceptable if it later became a tragic folk song, performed by that very same gossipy bard. And then there were the omens. If a raven flew overhead while you were thinking about someone, bad sign, don't even bother. If you drop bread at dinner while glancing at your crush, forget it, that's a cursed union, probably leading to crop failure and an unfortunate case of boils. Someone might bury a charm under your doorstep to protect you from improper suitors, or to sabotage your chances, either worked, depending on who planted it. Love in this world wasn't just personal, it was mystical, public, and fraught with potential disaster. Everyone had an opinion. The stars, the saints, the weather, and that one woman in the woods who definitely wasn't a witch, except she probably was. But despite all the rules, signs, and whispered warnings, people still loved, clumsily, bravely, often against advice. Because medieval or not, the heart remains wonderfully disobedient, a stubborn little organ determined to find affection even in the face of plague, poverty, and disapproving priests.